This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to take you behind the scenes of global aviation. If you've listened to our previous episodes, you know we've posed your questions to the experts before. In podcast 19, we had Ask the Captain. In podcast 28, we did Ask a Flight Attendant. Well, today, we're pleased to bring you Ask an Air Traffic Controller. Kyrandgel Rios is an air traffic controller in the U.S., normally assigned to San Juan, Puerto Rico. He joins us today via Skype from San Juan. Kyrandgel, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So we've got a lot of questions to get to. So let's start with this one. How long have you been an air traffic controller, and why did you become one?
So I've been in the business for about 7 years, very close to 7 years. Actually, I decided to be an air traffic controller very long ago. I remember as a kid, I used to play this video game called Flight Simulator, which I believe is still around. And that has nothing to do with air traffic, but that fascinated me with the aviation industry. So I researched into it a little bit. I learned about air traffic via Google, I guess. And I investigated a lot about it, and that's really what sparked my interest in this field.
And why did it fascinate you so much?
When you're a kid, you always want to be either a firefighter, a police officer,
Jedi Knight.
Those are the exactly. But I guess I wanted to be all of the above. But when I found this really interested me more, and I guess because there's not a lot of exposure on this profession, that's why kids don't really want to do this. But I bet you if kids hear about this job and see how cool it is, and see that there are actually people working up there in that tower at the airport, they would all want to be air traffic controllers.
Well, I know as soon as they listen to this podcast, they'll all be coming to the career fair to sign up. So that actually leads me to a great question, which is the Hollywood version. Sometimes we see scenes in movies of air traffic control, and it is depicted as this very high-stress, tense room, beads of sweat going down your forehead, moving around with these strips of paper or wood. So just tell us how it really is and how that compares to the movie version.
Well, obviously, movies try to sensationalize, stuff for the sake of selling. There are things that, you see and you relate to, but I would have to say that mostly is not an accurate depiction of what we do. The overall feeling that you get when you walk into an air traffic facility is, first of all, it's a very quiet environment. But second, it's not a place where the environment is tense at all times. Actually, you can hear controllers when there's not a lot of traffic. You can hear controllers joking, or just finding a stress reliever to get through the day. And of course, not every day and not every hour is as busy as movies make it seem. But being an air traffic controller, I do enjoy the movies. I have nothing against them.
There was an interesting first-person account of being an air traffic controller in the United Kingdom by a man named Carlos Turner. I found the interview when I was doing research for this podcast. He works at the Heathrow Airport Tower, which everyone knows is one of the most congested airports in the world. And in this Q&A that was published by The Telegraph, he made a fascinating distinction about the job, and I'm wondering if you agree. He said, quote, "It isn't about stress, it's about pressure." Do you agree with that?
Yes. I don't think that I would say anything against it, but I would say that pressure could lead to stress, depending on the situation. But yeah, there is, you have your key moments, where everything, where it seems like everybody just wants to leave at the same time, where every airline, every pilot talked and said, we're all going to leave at noon.
And what do you do in that instance? Tell them, hold on, cool your jets?
In a nutshell, we have procedures in place to mitigate those busy times, whether it's implementing a flow, or holding them on the ground, slowing speeds in some cases, using alternate routes. There are a variety of things that we can do to not only keep moving the traffic, but do it as efficiently as possible.
So what's a typical day on the job for you? Just take us through the moment you walk in to the moment you leave.
So a typical day, I would, having done other things in my life, it's pretty, you wake up and it's pretty much like going to any other job. One of the cool things that a lot of people agree in the air traffic industry is that you barely take any work home. So you wake up in the morning and you're not thinking about this paper or this, whatever you have to, hand over to your boss by noon. You just know that you're gonna go, and you expect a good day. So you wake up, you go to work, you plug in, you ask the supervisor where do they need you. So and depending on the air traffic facility, you have different positions or sectors. And if you are certified in those sectors, then the supervisor will assign you a certain sector for you to work at, and then you work it. Sometimes it's a very slow day. Sometimes you jump right on the position, and it seems like I said before, like everybody wants to fly out at the same time. You get through it. You get some breaks in the middle. Normally in the U.S., a controller will not be plugged in on position for more than 2 hours, and then they'll get a small break to sort of ease up and release any of the stress that may have built up during those 2 hours.
And how long are those breaks?
Go do it again. Anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. They're not really long breaks unless, you ask for some more time to, have your lunch or dinner, whatever the case may be. And generally speaking, I'll say, in my facility at least, we're very understanding of controllers' needs. And, if they need, a little more time to do, anything, even if it's a personal thing, we'll try to give it to them because we know that that'll bring a fresh controller to the operation.
Right. You don't want someone who's distracted or thinking about other things going on in their life. How long is a shift? 8 hours, 10 hours?
It's 8 hours, yes. And just to add a bit on the previous question, you hit a key point there. You don't want anybody who's thinking about other things while they're on position. If there's a person that's not feeling well, that has something in their mind, we could assign them other tasks that are not really to talk to airplanes. There are a variety of things that we could do to have that person perform at their best at all times.
You mentioned a moment ago about different sectors. So explain this to us. Is the airport sort of divided into a grid and everyone gets a certain piece of it, whether it's takeoffs or landings or this side of the airport or that side? What is a sector exactly? And when you go into work, do you alternate sectors or how does that go?
So if you don't mind, Mark, I'll change your question into a broader one. And I'll take you through a typical flight from, let's say, San Juan in my case to Miami, and then I guess that during that flight you'll see I can explain to you the difference in sectors and how the airspace is divided. Is that good?
I think in this case your answer is better than my question, so you go right ahead. You're the guest. Be my guest.
All right. So, you're getting ready to board your flight. You go to the airport. While you're boarding the flight, you see that the pilots are doing something in the cabin, and you don't know what it is, but they seem to be working there. They arrive a little bit earlier than you, and what they're doing is one of the things that they're doing. After they do their airplane checklist, is contacting a position called clearance delivery. They can do so via normal radio, or they can do so via a computer. Think of it as a text messaging app on their flight. So that controller or that position is in charge of clearing the airplane through a through a route that they have already requested. So the controller may change the route depending on traffic density, or they may give them a better one, or they may just give the pilot what they requested. After that, when the doors close, they will request to the ground controller, which is the next position, to push back out of the gate. And that controller is in charge of moving airplanes all around the airport, except on the runways. So then when you get close to the runway, the pilot will contact another controller, which is the tower or local controller. And then that controller will get him on the runway and get him going. That controller is typically in charge of runways and the immediate vicinity of the airport. And immediate is a relative term because depending on how big the airport is, that vicinity could be 5, 10, 15 miles, and as high as 10,000 feet up. So after that, when you as soon as you're in the air, they switch you to another controller, which is on a facility known as a TRACON, and this controller is normally called a departure controller. That departure controller will climb you to a higher altitude. So he'll basically put all the airplanes on the line so that the next controller, which is the en route controller or the center controller, will take you through your final requested altitude. So when you hear that the pilot goes on speaker and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising speed and our cruising altitude at 32,000 feet," well, now you're talking to a center controller. And the centers are very big. There's only 20 of them in the United States. So they do have a lot of area to cover, a lot of geographical area to cover. And what they do is they separate those centers in sectors. So Miami Center, for example, is separated into a bunch of different sectors. For example, the Everglades sector, the coastal sectors. So when you're on your flight, you're switching from a center controller to another center controller, which is in another sector, and then you work your way down on that controller ladder towards the TRACON controller, and then to the tower controller in Miami, which do the same but in reverse. Does that make sense?
Oh my goodness! So in a typical flight, how many people with air traffic control and the various way stations will a pilot speak to?
Oh, I mean, from here to Miami, you could speak to about close to 10 air traffic controllers, maybe more.
Wow, so it's really kind of like a relay race. You sort of hand off the baton to the next person.
That's a perfect analogy. Yeah. So every controller is specialized in something, in a specific task. That's why the system is so efficient, and that's why it's such a safe system, because each air traffic controller at each facility is dedicated towards doing one specific task. It's not I am a tower controller, so I do work at the tower. When you go to the airport and you see the tower, I know about that. But I can't really speak to you about a lot about the center or TRACONs, because that's not really my specialty, if you will.
Oh, so fascinating. Listeners, this is the Ask an Air Traffic Controller episode on the Voyage Report podcast, so I'm doing the very best I can to ask all of your questions that you want to know about. We're chatting with Kyrandgel Rios, an air traffic controller based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. You can follow the National Air Traffic Controllers Association on Twitter at NATCA, on Facebook at NATCA Family, and on Instagram at NATCA National. Now, Kyrandgel, I do want to ask you some other questions about how this works day to day, but first we do want to mention that you are in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and so you rode out these horrible hurricanes a couple of months ago. Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, which absolutely devastated the island. I think as we're speaking here, a third of the island still doesn't have electricity. Some cell sites are still not back online, and obviously a lot of people are still out of their homes. You posted a video on YouTube, a couple of them, about that experience, and one I want to play a portion of it for our listeners. This is actually in the heart of the storm. You're being battered where you're staying, your hotel, and it really is quite something. And so let's play a little bit of this YouTube video about your experience. We can actually see your feet in standing water there in the hotel, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
Last night around 4 a.m., I had to evacuate my room because of the flooding. There was so much water coming into the room that I didn't have time to put a towel and rinse it over in the bathroom and then come back and put it again. It was just, the entire room got flooded. So at around 4 a.m., we had to evacuate the room. And luckily, we have 6 other people staying here, and one of them had 2 beds. So we're gonna be staying here today. But it was a restless night. Nobody got any rest here. It was just bad and plain scary.
Kyrandgel, you mentioned that you didn't even know where your mom and your dad were when the hurricane hit. That was really powerful stuff on that video.
Yeah, I mean, it still gives me shivers, just to think about that moment. I really, that's one of the things that I remember the most. At that, to be honest with you, at that moment, work wasn't even on my mind. The fact that, it's very interesting preparing for a hurricane, because you know that it's coming. It's not a natural disaster like any other, like an earthquake where happens all of a sudden. You're waiting for this. The night before the hurricane, the family got together and we had dinner. And then we said our goodbyes, as if we don't know what's going to happen, because there was a Cat 5 hurricane coming to Puerto Rico, and none of us had gone through that experience before. So unfortunately, I had to work, so I couldn't take my family with me. So, we said our goodbyes, and then the next day when I realized that, when I went out to the tower and I saw that the devastation, that's when I really, when it really hit you, that you don't know when you're going to hear about your family again, and if they're okay.
Your video did go viral at the time because you were one of the few people that could actually transmit and get a video out. Something else that went viral was this lone Delta Airlines plane that basically threaded a needle through the bands of the storm as it was about to hit San Juan. I don't know if you were working in the tower that day. I think they did it twice. I think they did it right before Irma and then right before Maria. Basically the only plane in the sky. Were you working for that?
Yeah, I actually worked during both hurricanes. I actually was there in the tower for the Delta flight. But I'll give you an insider scoop on the Delta flight. For us at the tower, it wasn't the most impressive flight to come in and out. It was just impressive, when you looked at the radar and you saw the hurricane getting so close to the island. On a picture, it looked really impressive. I mean, I see it and it impresses even me. But there were certainly other flights that, in my opinion, performed under much worse weather situations.
That's fascinating.
During the hurricane, yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I felt as though there were so many people on social media following that Delta flight. Flight Radar 24 is a great account on social media on Twitter to follow, and they kept posting radar images. And as the hurricane was coming ashore, there was this tiny sliver of clear air in between the bands, and you could just see this Delta flight threading that needle. I think that they landed with passengers, and they took off in some crazy turnaround. I mean, like in 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and then thread the needle. But you said there were even more impressive planes.
Yeah, and which is an achievement. I don't want to downplay, what Delta and their pilots did, because it was impressive, and I'm sure that they had the worst flight getting out of the island. And I remember, before that Delta flight arrived, the airport operator called the tower and said, "Hey, we have this plane. It'll be the last one coming in. We have everything ready for them. We have doubled the staff to work the plane. We're gonna try and get this plane in and out in 30 minutes." And that that really was impressive, because the time that the airplane was on the ground, it was such a short time. I mean, usually when a plane comes in, it'll take them easily an hour before it goes back up in the air. But everybody did a great job, and it goes to speak, how many people work an airplane. And it's not just the pilots; it's the ground crew, the flight attendants, the gate agents. There were hundreds of people that had to be there in order to take care of that flight, and then they had to go home in the middle of it.
Amazing teamwork from everybody involved. Let's take a listen
Oh, yeah.
to another video that you posted. You showed viewers on YouTube the condition of the base of the air traffic control tower there in San Juan. The hurricane had left, and yet it was still raining inside. Take a listen, listeners.
The rest of the terminals are just they just have too much water, and the ceiling tiles are falling. As far as the air traffic control tower, we're not allowed in. But the entrance to the tower is destroyed. It's raining inside of the terminal where the air traffic control tower entrance is. Pretty much, over half of the roof tiles are in the floor. There's puddles. It smells really bad. It smells like like mold and rotten. Fire alarms are going off everywhere.
Wow, just amazing. You could hear those fire alarms in the video. And Kyrandgel, initially you said only 60% of the air traffic controllers were accounted for?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, communications were down. So it took us a few days to get in touch with the rest of the crew.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, we're very glad that you're all safe there. And now the airports are back up and running, even though the island has a long ways to go still to get the assistance they need. What do you think is most misunderstood about air traffic control?
I mean, it's going to be a funny answer, but I get, whenever somebody asks me what I do for a living and I tell them that I'm an air traffic controller, they're always thinking that I'm the ramp agent or the air marshal downstairs waving the glowing sticks. That's what I get the most, and that's what the majority of the other people think. But on a more serious aspect, what I think is more misunderstood in air traffic is the fact that there are many more people working, and it's just not the tower folks. The tower folks are just a small part of the system. So for example, I mean, in San Juan Tower, you have about 25 employees, but in San Juan Center, you have over 100 that are working there, and probably 70 of those 70 to 80 are air traffic controllers that do, what I explained before.
At any one time in the skies, there are 1 million people in the air worldwide. We chatted about this for one of our first podcasts last year. City in the Sky was a PBS series. They went inside all the aspects of aviation, from the air traffic control tower to baggage claim, to the baggage carousels, to catering, to even the doctors and nurses on the ground that help with medical emergencies. And so, listeners, that's podcast number 4. We speak with the director of a PBS series that went behind the scenes. It's called City in the Sky. All right, so Kyrandgel, when I'm up in the air and we have to circle over an airport for a while, the pilot usually comes on and he blames you guys. He blames air traffic control.
It's the easiest, right? Yeah, I mean, that does happen. And sometimes we are the middlemen, so to speak. And because of the nature of our job, because it is so fast paced, sometimes we don't have the time to explain to the pilot what's going on. Just like the pilot will not really explain the full extent of the circumstances to their passengers, just to, not freak them out, if I had to put it in those words. But we will be the ones ultimately to tell the pilot to hold. But it could be for a variety of reasons. And I'll give you a local example, something that happens all the time in Puerto Rico. We have iguanas that come on the runway. So if an iguana enters the runway, just before the airplane is about to land, I have to send the airplane around. And it has nothing to do with, with a malfunction with the airplane, or that that we're not being efficient or anything. It's just that there's a live animal on the runway, and you don't want that below you when you're landing. Other things that could happen, are weather. Of course, traffic density. If it's very busy, and you could have weather not necessarily at that airport, but if you're going to Miami Airport and there's a lot of weather in Fort Lauderdale, so all that traffic that diverted from Fort Lauderdale to Miami will back that airport up. So controllers will have to take action in order to make sure that everybody's separated safely.
Well, I've been to 61 countries so far, and I've never had an iguana alert. So thank you for letting.
Come to Puerto Rico.
Yes, well, I've been there once, several years ago. Actually, I went for my 30th birthday to celebrate, but I don't recall having an iguana alert. That's quite something. Listeners, if you had an iguana alert, let us know.
Just like at other airports, like Captain Sully had the Canadian geese problem. Each airport will have their problems. I'm sure dogs and deer are around.
Well, right, because as silly as it sounds, if you get an animal of any kind sucked into those jet engines, that could be catastrophic, whether it's a bird or a geese or iguana. So clearly you want to avoid any kinds of obstructions or objects on the runway, no matter what they are. So let's go back to the air traffic control hold there, because explain this to us. Sometimes we'll be in the air, and the airport will be backed up, and so we know we have to circle around, and the pilot tells us that. And other times we're held at our departure airport. Can you explain the difference of the two, and why one might be in place and not the other?
So normally, I'll start with the airport hold. Normally, that hold comes because of an issue, a problem that we have knowledge beforehand. So we'd rather not, make the pilot waste fuel in the air, and potentially going to an emergency because of low fuel. So if, for example, there's normally the weather is the biggest factor here in holding airplanes on their departure point. So if there's a weather cell that's just too big to get around, or there are just too many airplanes trying to get around that and the airspace is congested, then it's in the best interest to hold the plane on the ground. It wouldn't make sense to add another airplane to the problem and make it even bigger. For the holds near the airport, normally those are temporary fixes to temporary solutions to something that is happening, which will get fixed, relatively soon. If not, if you are holding, you're pretty much going to the airport you intended to go. And air traffic control will not hold you forever, and if the airport was closed, definitely. So, for example, with the hurricane in Puerto Rico, air traffic control wouldn't hold you and wait for the hurricane to pass. It would say you're going to have to deviate, so just give me an alternate airport, and I'll take you there. So it's normally a temporary solution.
What are you most worried about when you're on duty?
Accidents. Accidents are the things that really worry us. I have had the unfortunate opportunity to witness 2 fatal crashes, and that's something that you always want to avoid, and you definitely always want to be ready for.
And were those private aircraft, or were those jet aircraft? They were not jet aircraft, but they were both commercial. So remember, we have a lot of islands surrounding Puerto Rico. So the way to get in and out of those islands, it's normally via prop airplanes. That's something that's very unfortunate, and something that nothing can really prepare you for that. If an air traffic controller is involved in something like that, take us through the process. I would imagine that there is a fair bit of grief and traumatic experience for that air traffic controller, just like there is for first responders on the ground.
You're exactly right. Just like any other human being, whether it is on whether you're watching that airplane disappear on your radar scope, or whether you're at the tower and you see the smoke rising near the airport, it's always very traumatic. So, one of the things that we always have to keep in mind is to keep our composure, because, an airplane may have gone down, but you may still have 10, 15 other airplanes depending on you, and you need to separate them. So what we do is as soon as possible, and normally this happens within seconds of the accident, we remove that controller from the operation and send that controller and pretty much send that controller home for the day. But then still the personnel that are left behind have to deal with this situation. And it's very stressful. I've like I said before, I've had to work through two accidents, and that's when you hold airplanes on the air. If the runway is closed, if the accident happened on the runway, or if it happened too close to the airport, you want to make sure that the runway is clean and that that aircraft did not crash because of something that happened on the runway. So yeah, it is something very stressful, and something that weighs on you when you're going to work. You never want to see that.
The reason I asked about jet aircraft, it has been a remarkable streak for safety for jet aircraft in the United States. I think the last fatal jet crash was in 2009. And 2017 just saw another one with 0 passenger jet fatalities. Obviously, there have been smaller crashes, but for mainline jet aircraft, it has been a remarkable streak here of safety. Certainly safer than when I get in my car and I go on the freeway.
Wow, yeah. Well, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's been impressive. So whenever I'm on the plane and somebody said that they're really worried, I tell them that they're usually in pretty good hands. So what is more complicated to handle, a takeoff or a landing?
I think, to be honest, from an air traffic perspective, I think they're both the same. I can't really tell you that one or the other is more complicated. I can tell you though, that if you work in a single runway airport, you're gonna have to wait until one lands in order to take the other one out. So that makes it easier, I would say. But some of the other airports, they would have to balance between 4 or 5, 6 runways, and sometimes crossing runways, and that presents a challenge. But as far as one or the other being harder, not really. I mean, different phraseology, clear for takeoff, clear to land. But other than that, I don't see a difference between the two.
Let's talk about Squawking 7700. What is that, and what happens when that occurs?
So yeah, we have different squawks that are preset for different types of situation. And 7700 is an in-flight emergency. The pilot, it's telling you something via the radar. So when you see the 7700 squawk, you'll see that on your scope. It'll be flashing, and that'll take your attention towards that flight, and you know what action to take. Now, normally, when an airplane, when a pilot is having an emergency, and they will let you know, and not necessarily will they squawk 7700. In my experience, I've only seen 7700 squawks when a pilot is not in communication with ATC, or when they lose a radio, so that is and actually I can tell you that sometimes the controller will tell the pilot to go back to their normal squawk once the emergency is taken care of, because 7700 it's just a notification means. An emergency, could be a variety of things, as I'm sure that when you talk to the pilot.
Exactly. No, it was a fascinating podcast. And before we go on, I've been handed this, so I want to make sure that I'm totally accurate on it. So the last time there was a crash by a U.S. airline resulting in a passenger death was 2009. As I mentioned, the last commercial jet accident on U.S. soil that resulted in a passenger fatality was 2013 when Asiana Airlines plane went down in San Francisco upon landing. So either way you look at it, an incredible safety record for U.S. air traffic. What type of education and training is required to become an air traffic controller?
So there are various ways to become an air traffic controller. I became an air traffic controller via a program called the CTI, College Training Initiative, and I went to college for that. I have a bachelor's degree in aviation science. And after that, I applied for the agency that I work with, and after that, they send you to an academy in order to become an air traffic controller, which is very tough to say the least. If you make it through the academy, you are sent to your facility, and depending on your score, on your test scores, you'll have sort of if you can call it that, sort of a seniority, so they'll rank. The higher you rank, the more options you'll have as to where you're going to work. So once they send you to the facility, you're not an air traffic controller yet. You just made it through the academy. The academy basically tells you that you're ready to train. So once you go to the facility, you'll train for the specifics of that airport or that environment that you're going to be working in, and that training could take anywhere from a year to 3 years. So the training is very, very extensive and very long.
Right, because every airport is set up differently, right?
Correct. If you work at an airport and you're certified there, you're an air traffic controller, and you move to another airport, you'll go back to being a trainee, and you'll have to start over again.
Fascinating. So even if you worked at San Juan Tower for 20 years and you changed airports, you'd be back to a trainee.
You would be back to a trainee because everything changes. No two airports are alike. You would have to train on their specific procedures, their standard operating procedures. Everything changes when you move airports.
Fascinating. Will, I would be remiss here if I didn't ask you about something in the news. This year, the Trump administration is talking about doing an infrastructure plan, and there's been a lot of debate for a couple of years on air traffic control and whether to privatize it or not. I think in Canada, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think in Canada it is privatized. How would this change your duties, or how is it set up now, just so that people, when they read about this later this year, if this plan comes out, what they would know about it?
So in the United States, we have basically three systems. We have government air traffic controllers. We do have private air traffic controllers. I don't know if you know that. And we also have military air traffic controllers. The private air traffic controllers are normally in charge of lower traffic airports. The government air traffic controllers are normally assigned to the busier facilities. And the military as well, they take care of their own. But in comparison to the Canada system, Canada is a private for-profit system. And that is something that NACA definitely opposes when it comes to any type of reform in the air traffic system. We do not want to compromise the safety for the sake of profit. So any system that essentially puts money ahead of safety, that's something that we'll definitely oppose, and that's our take on it, basically.
Sure, and I think President Trump has expressed his support for it, so we're definitely going to have to watch for 2018 and see what happens. Speaking of 2018 and in the year ahead, I know Santa came a few weeks ago, but you tell me, what is on the air traffic control wish list for 2018 here? If Santa came a little bit later and brought you some gifts, what does air traffic control in the U.S. need here in the year ahead?
That's a great question. Stable funding. We need a stable funding stream to make sure that our system, remains a global leader, to make sure that, we have the newest equipment, and that's, I mean, if I could ask for one thing, it's just stable funding. Whereas government shutdowns or just being at the whims of Congress is just something that is not really beneficial for the flying public.
Right, I believe you're referring to these continuing resolutions, and for our listeners who aren't aware, basically the government is supposed to pass a full-year budget. The federal budget year begins every October 1st, but I think for 24 now times over the last 5 or 6 years, Congress has sort of punted and passed these continuing resolutions, which just simply means a short-term funding bill at the previous year's funding level. And so some people complain that it doesn't allow you to set priorities or know how much you're going to get for the year ahead. So if I hear you correct, what you're saying is you just want a stable funding source so that you know what money you're going to get and what you can spend it on.
As of now, we are on a continuing resolution, which, if I'm not mistaken, expires on January 19th. So what that means is, equipment will not be modernized. Travel gets suspended. So we're operating on on a week-to-week basis, sometimes a 2-week basis, and that's really, in my opinion, not a very good way to run a federal agency that's taking care of such a safety-sensitive issue.
Listeners, it's time to ask Kyrandgel for his crystal ball forecast for air traffic control 5, 10, even 15 years in the future. So let me ask you, are you afraid you're going to be replaced by a robot, Siri or Alexa or something like that?
That is a very interesting question. I think that the human aspect, will always be needed. It's. I mean, I was actually, I'll kind of veer off the question for a little bit. I was actually in Pennsylvania not long ago, and I went to the Turkey Hill factory, the ice cream place, and I saw, they were talking about the milkmen, and they talked about how frustrated they were, when they were going to lose their jobs. And that, that sort of reminded me of how some people may feel on any given profession. But in my personal opinion, I think that is just the way things are. That is just our human nature. We take advantage of technology. I embrace it. If it's for the sake of running a safe operation, I think that's the way to go. I think that technology will be much more embedded into what we do in the future. But I honestly do not see the workforce getting reduced dramatically because of the technology. There's still a long way to go before technology can do what we do.
So you're not worried about Elon Musk and his Tesla self-driving vehicles coming after you, huh?
Not yet. It's a very big and complicated system. But I mean, it'll be cool on a personal level. I mean, I think we're in for a ride for the next couple of years if we can manage to get that stable funding.
All right, since you know so much about the air traffic control system, let's give our listeners some top tips to make their airborne journey as smooth as possible. So tell me, what are some tips that both the frequent and infrequent traveler should know as they're flying? Maybe it's not to throw oranges at the air traffic control tower when there's a hold, or maybe it's something else. But what have you learned in your 7 years as an air traffic controller that you'd like to pass on to the traveling public?
So one of the things that people may not, have in their thoughts when they get on an airplane, especially the infrequent travelers, is that this system is built on redundancy. There are steps put in place in order to protect you, in order to make your flight as safe as possible, and it doesn't start and stop with the pilot. You have your first officer, you have your flight attendants, you have your ground crew, you have your air traffic controllers, you have your traffic managers, your traffic management unit. There are so many people that are put in place in order to make one flight reach the destination. So it's much safer than we feel. and it's funny, when I go on a plane and people are worried, hey, is this flight gonna be safe? Hey, there are tough requirements for these airplanes to be airworthy and to go on the air. Also, go-arounds are stressful times for passengers, and that's not something that really worries me because if an airplane goes around, it means that it did it for the sake of being safe.
And when you say
like
go
we
around,
talked
you
earlier.
mean when the airliner is coming in for a landing and all of a sudden the aircraft goes up and circles around.
I'm sorry. Yes. So yeah, go around is when the airplane is making the approach to the runway at any given airport, and the controller instructs them to climb, and then that's why the phrase is go around, and then that pilot will be resequenced to that airport, and it's all done in the name of safety.
Kyrandgel Rios is an air traffic controller and iguana wrangler based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. You could follow the National Air Traffic Controllers Association on Twitter at NATCA, on Facebook at NATCA Family, and on Instagram at NATCA National. Kyrandgel, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and taking our questions here on the Voyage Report podcast. It's been a fascinating insight, and next time I'm flying into San Juan, I will definitely wave at the tower.
Thank you, Mark. It was my pleasure.
Listeners, what do you think about being an air traffic controller? What else would you like to know? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com. and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.